I'm Corey Mason, head strength coach at Ashland University in Ashland, Ohio. It's like an hour and a half from here. I just started this position in February. I spent the last couple of years at Allegheny College in Northwest Pennsylvania, but I'll get to that in just a second. First of all, I want to say thank you to you guys for being here. I've been at tons of conferences and summits and presentations where there's no one at the last presentation, because it's the end of the day. Everyone's been here since early in the morning. They've listened to people talk and sit down for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. And it's always hard to be the last presenter. In fact, a couple years ago, I was at the Pennsylvania State Clinic for the NSCA conference, and the sports science head from the Houston Texans was talking, and there were probably 100 people there at 8 a.m. and 10 people there at 4 p.m. 4 o'clock. So I always applaud people for sticking around at the end of conferences, and I appreciate you guys being here. Next slide. First off, again, thank you to you guys for being here. Thank you to Stray Dog for allowing me to speak. By no means do I feel like an authority to speak on any of these topics at all. So I appreciate the ability to come here and give some of my insights to you guys and what I've experienced over the last couple of years, and for the ability to be here at Stray Dog. At Ashland, we have Stray Dog equipment, and Nick and Matt are Ashland alums. So I feel super fortunate to be in the position that I'm in, to be in a good relationship with Stray Dog, see some of its equipment, and hopefully we can have a good relationship in the future, and maybe even get some upgrades that look as nice as the equipment that we have here. Obviously, thank you to the sponsors and people that have helped me get here. For those of you guys that don't know, I have a twin brother who's a strength coach at Division II Shepherd University in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, and he absolutely destroyed this presentation 4 or 5 times as I'm writing it, and it's just a couple of slides on Canva. So I appreciate his mentorship and the people that have came before me to help me. And again, I'm just trying to share some insights into what I've experienced so far. A little bit from my professional. Oh, wow, this slide did not work out very well. Well, this is my professional timeline. I appreciate it. I was a Division III student athlete at a school in Oregon with no strength coach. Grew up at a high school with no strength coach in Arizona. As much as you guys know, high school and Division III small school strength conditioning is on the rise, but it's very much so a growing field. It's not prevalent everywhere. So I did not have access to strength conditioning professionals for much of my athletic career until I was in undergrad, and I was able to do an unpaid internship at the University of Portland, which is a Division I small, I guess you can call it mid-major, non-football school in the West Coast Conference in Portland, Oregon, where I was mentored by a couple of really solid coaches up there that are still there. To this day, again, it's really difficult at the Division I level to see a staff that has been together. Those 3 coaches have been there for 10 years together, right? And so it was great to be able to learn from them for the last semester of my undergrad. From there, I went to the University of New Mexico and was there for a little bit over 3 years as both an unpaid intern with the football program, as a graduate assistant, and a full-time assistant, where I worked primarily with women's soccer, track and field, and the tennis programs there. But again, as we'll talk a little bit later, the facilities that were shared with several of the Olympic sports programs was where I was primarily housed, and so I was able to get experience in volleyball and softball and baseball and football and so on and so forth. After that, I was the director at Allegheny College, which is a Division III school in Northwest Pennsylvania, in the President's Athletic Conference, where for several years I was the one strength coach on campus for 21 varsity sports and 450 student athletes. Got 1 full-time assistant after a couple of years. Again, we'll talk about it here in a slide or two. That was up until February of this year, and then I just started my position at Ashland again in February, which is a Division II school in Great Midwest Conference, about an hour and a half north of here. And so I'm currently working my way through that position. Go to the next slide. Thank you. By the numbers for these positions, a little bit of what I've just spoken about. The University of Portland, Division I non-football school, West Coast Conference, 16 varsity sports, 400 student athletes-ish. University of New Mexico, an FBS program, or what we consider a group of 5 conference school. Now, the Mountain West Conference with 18 varsity sports and 500 student athletes. Allegheny College, where I was just up until February, Division III school, President's Athletic Conference, 21 varsity sports, 450 athletes, and now Ashland, looking at Division II school, 24 varsity sports, just about 750 student athletes. Again, these are all the schools that I've worked in some form or fashion with strength conditioning as a part of, in addition to the high school that I went to, which is in Peoria, Arizona, Liberty High School. I'm fortunate enough to have a great relationship with my high school wrestling coach. It was the reason why I wanted to be a coach in general. And so myself and my twin brother have done some programming, both in person and remotely, for the wrestling program over the course of the last 10, 15 years. So as a rule for myself, when I give presentations, I try to not put a lot of information on the slides so that you guys don't just read the slides. So there's probably going to be 2 or 3 bits of words on the slides, and I'm just going to talk about those concepts, right? So there's not going to be a lot of information on the slides, as you can see here, right? And we'll just talk a little bit about how these impact what you do as a coach, how you coach, how you train the athletes, and then as well as the lifestyle that accompanies those things. So again, working at the different divisions, working at these different schools, obviously the weight rooms come bigger, come smaller, right? When I was at the University of New Mexico, we had one varsity weight room for football only. Football team trained in 15,000 square foot weight room, 16 racks, 30-yard strip of turf, right? The Olympic sports weight room was about maybe 3 to 5 minutes walk across the athletics campus, had 24 racks, 12 double-sided racks with a strip of concrete down the middle of them, machines all on the sides. And then basketball had their own weight room across the main road in Albuquerque. That was 6 racks with a basketball hoop in there and then a little dumbbell pit, right? At Allegheny, we had one 3,000 square foot weight room with 12 racks in it, 6 double-sided racks, and that was just about all we could fit into that weight room, right? And now at Ashland, we have 2 weight rooms, one that's primarily housed in our field sports offices facility, the Troop Center, and that weight room has 16 racks, 8 double-sided racks, and we have a facility that's in our basketball arena where most of our court sports train, and that room has 8 to 10 racks depending on how you want to configure it, with a big rig from Sornex right in the middle that you could use for racks, but it really just takes up a lot of space in the middle of the room. And those house our athletes, right? As far as practice fields go, at Ashland, practice fields are attached to the weight room. So the football field is right across from the weight room, right? I can open up my doors and go right to the football field, right? It's maybe about a 10-minute walk to our indoor practice field. That's an 80-yard strip of turf and a 200-meter indoor track where we now host all the indoor and outdoor track and field events for the GMAC every single year, right? At Allegheny, at the University of New Mexico, facilities are obviously different, right? At Allegheny, no indoor track, no field access. It's maybe 15-minute drive to our athletics facilities where our football field is, right, where our practice fields are, tennis courts, so on and so forth. Right, so that impacts the way that you train. Staffing, right? The biggest piece about getting a good service to your student athletes is being able to provide adequate staffing in the sessions to them, right? When I was at Portland, again, they have 16 varsity sports, 3 full-time strength coaches, several interns per semester. At the University of New Mexico, as of right now, they have 5 full-times for football, right? They have 2 for Olympic sports and then 1 for men's basketball and 1 for women's basketball, right? That was not the case when I was there. When I was there, it was 2 full-times for football with 1 GA. I was a GA on the Olympic side for 1 year before that position was cut. And then there were 2 full-times for Olympic sports, still 1 for men's basketball, still 1 for women's basketball, right? And at Allegheny, again, I spent 2 years as the director with just 1 staff member before we were able to add a full-time staff member, full-time assistant there. So we had 2 for all of our 21 varsity sports, 450 student athletes. And then now I'm in a very similar situation at Ashland, where we have 2 full-time strength conditioning staff members for our 24 varsity sports, 750 student athletes across 2 different weight rooms, right? We're more likely to see part-time graduate assistants at the Division II level, at the Division I level than you are at the Division III level. Again, it just comes down to the haves and the have-nots. The schools that have more money to be able to allocate to strength conditioning are going to be able to have more strength conditioning staff members. The schools that don't, they won't. And it's not very difficult for you to look around at small school strength conditioning, Division III, high school, Division II, and see low staff members, small weight rooms, like not a lot of facilities. I didn't mention this on the previous slide. When I was at Allegheny College, our varsity weight room was housed in the same building that was the community center for all of Meadville. Right? So you could buy a membership to the facility. You could walk in, and the varsity weight room was housed in there. It was a varsity-only space, but any of the facilities around it, so our basketball courts, the tennis courts, was all in the same building that the community members were in. Right? And so at any one time, I could have 50 football guys in the weight room with music blaring, with the windows open, and also 10 people that live down the street here using the machines, right? Next slide. One of the biggest things that impacts the way that we train and operate as coaches at the college level is NCAA rules and operations, right? And so at the Division II level now, right, in the off season, and Division I level, the student athletes are allowed 8 hours of sport-related activity, right? That can be strength conditioning, that can be sport practice, that can be film, that can be in-person coaching, so on and so forth. I believe for men's basketball, Olympic sports, that is now able to be split up into 4 hours of strength conditioning and 4 of sport practice. For football, it's a little bit different. And at the Division I level, it might be a little bit different. And then at the Division III level, when I was there, those hour rules don't exist, right? So there was no 8 hours, 20-hour rules, right? But in the off season, the training can be mandatory, and so you can't take attendance, can't tell a sport coach who's there, who's not there, right? I can't take progress of the athletes and look at their lifting numbers, spring numbers, so on and so forth, and report that back to the sport coach. Or I can't post it on social media. Anything that would allow a staff member that is a part of the sport coaching staff to see who is in attendance and who is not in attendance is illegal for the NCAA. So that changes the way that you coach the athletes, the way that you train in the facilities, and the way that you interact with the sport coaches and the athletes, because you have to be able to create an environment that's worth being in, that the athletes want to come back to, because they don't have to be there, they don't need to be there, and I can't report back who is there and who is not there, right? Just like Dan said earlier, support from administration is huge, right? An administration that supports what you want to do as a strength conditioning coach, supports adding staff members, adding new facilities, adding new equipment, or revitalizing current weight rooms, so on and so forth. That stuff is massive in being able to train the athletes effectively and not burn yourself out, right? Whether you report to the AD directly or whether you report to an assistant AD may also impact the way that you coach and train your student athletes, because what comes back to you from the administration, right, what comes back to you from the sport coaches, what comes back to the sport coaches from the student athletes may now be impacted by that reporting line, as well as informal and formal communication lines between yourself and that administrator, yourself and the sport coach. Are you meeting once a week? Are you meeting once a month? Are you meeting at all? Do they care at all about what's happening? Right, those impact the way that you do your job as well. No worries. All good. Again, budget and funding is going to vary from, a lot of this comes down to, again, the haves and the have-nots. As you go from Division I to Division II to Division III, it's not uncommon to see the funding is going to get lower and lower and lower. The support is going to get lower and lower and lower. And it's also, I'm not going to sit here and say that there's also not a microcosm or a fractal of that within each division in and of itself. A school like the University of Mount Union, who's wildly successful in Division III athletics, is probably going to have more resources than somewhere in low-tier Division II that doesn't have as many resources, right? And same thing goes for Group of 5 schools versus Power 5 schools. Same thing goes for mid-majors versus low majors at Division I level, right? So there's different, essentially, there's levels to this stuff, right? And when you work at a school where, for example, at Ashland, right, our teams have been wildly successful over the course of the last couple of years, right? And when I got there in February, I learned that we have no strength conditioning budget, right? And we have racks from Stray Dog that are the same ones that are Generation 1 Stray Dog racks. They're built in 2010, installed in 2010, and have not been maintained or revitalized since then. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with bare bones strength conditioning racks, barbells, dumbbells. But it impacts the way that you can program for those teams, right? It impacts what you can do with the facility, right? When you learn that at Allegheny, right, there's an alum that wants to donate some money to the program to get you some equipment or some technology, right? It opens up doors for what you can do, right? What you can do, what you can't do, and how you interact with those people that are, supporting your goal in the strength conditioning department is super important. The same thing goes with nutrition. When I was at Allegheny, I was fortunate enough to get a small budget to be able to have nutritional assistance for our athletes. It was far and away from the weight room, right? And it was not going to be able to be supervised. So we couldn't tell the athletes how much they could get, right? So it was an honor system. They had to go up and make sure they grab one snack, one scoop of protein powder. But on the opposite end of that, right, I learned at the College Strength Conditioning Coaches Association's conference in Indianapolis 2 weeks ago at this point, that a school in I want to say Southwest Missouri, Division II school, right? They have $130,000 strength conditioning budget, and $80,000 of that goes to nutrition every single year, right? That's great, really cool, right? And they can do a lot with that, right? But that might not be the case for someone like me, and I might not ever get to that point, right? But it is a tool that I can use in my administration to say that, hey, if we value being successful in Division II, we value being the best as important. We want to be the best in the GMAC, best in the region, or best in the country, right? This is what some of those schools are doing as well. Same thing goes for technology and sports science, right? When I was at the University of New Mexico, each of the weight rooms had velocity-based training units. The basketball weight room had perch. The football weight room had tendos, and our weight room had a couple of tendos for it. Right? When I at the basketball arena, each where I had an iPad at it. Football weight room had none of that. And we didn't have anything of that at the Olympic sports weight room either. But again, they just open and close doors for what you're able to do. I was talking with a couple of people here at lunch about the difference between some of the software systems that coaches use now and the way to streamline their programming from pen and paper. And as I've moved from Portland to New Mexico to Allegheny to Ashland, it's almost been a wave up and down of who has technology and who doesn't, who uses the software system and who doesn't. And obviously that just impacts the logistics of the athletes that are in your weight room, how they get the programming, how you coach the programming, and how you move forward from that. And the same thing goes for fundraising, right? The very, very bottom there. I was actually in the process here. I just talked with a coach from Fairmont State in West Virginia about they just did a lift-a-thon this past year. I think it was their second annual one, so it was great to hear about your guys' lift-a-thon as well. Because a lot of times the college coaches have some fundraising for ourselves as well. If we want to have some sort of equipment upgrade, some sort of budget, some sort of nutritional assistance, any sort of technology or sports science, sometimes you have to find ways to be creative, and whether that's going and talking to alumni, talking to donors, or showcasing some of your programming on social media, or showcasing it to your administration so they can show the people that are in support of your athletic department and your strength and conditioning department. Some of that stuff might help you with fundraising as well. Sport coaches, I will say this, right? At the very bottom, I put this quote: "This is the way we've always done it." And strength coaches hear it all the time, right? I found that when I was at the higher levels, the teams that were more successful were much more tied to what they had done when they were successful than at the lower level at the Division III when I was there. Especially for a school that I was at, that the teams have not been wildly successful in the past. They do not have a long story tradition of success. It is very much so that the coaches were excited to have somebody that was the content area expert on campus, right? Hey, we want you to be able to do this with our teams. We're really excited about getting in the weight room. You go do your thing, right? And that impacts the way you do your job, rather than having your hands tied by a sport coach that might want you to do a certain exercise or test certain metrics, right? Because they've done that in the past, or maybe they have a long list of year-to-year metric changes for the back squat and bench press. And when we won a national championship in 2005, we had this many 500-pound back squatters. So we need to have this many 500-pound back squatters in order to be a successful team, right? Like that may or may not impact the way that you do your job mostly, and how much of an argument are you willing to have? Like whether you think that's really important to be able to follow in line with that, or whether you think that it's the most important thing in the world or not, and whether you're willing to be able to lobby and argue for what you think is important for those teams, whether it's strength metrics or bone metrics and so on and so forth. And that has to do with history with the strength coaches, whether they've had good strength coaches in the past that they've enjoyed, right? That may have been really, really good at jobs. They may have been the strength coach in the past, right? And they may have done all the programming for themselves in the past. So some of those coaches want to have more of a hand in what you do than others. I've also noticed that as you raise in the levels, specifically in the track and field realm, right? Coaches want to have a big hand in what they do in the weight room, because track and field and swimming and diving, for that matter, are objective-based sports, and there's metrics that go along with their performance in the sport. And they generally want to have a little bit more of a hand in the strength training, because what you do in the strength training, they can see directly how it impacts what they do on the track or in the pool a little bit more than some of the team sports. Athletic training. This is mostly, in my opinion, about formal, informal communications lines at the college level, right? I've been fortunate enough to where our athletic training facilities have been very close to our weight rooms, and so I've been able to pop in and out to have conversations with the athletic training staff about who's injured, who needs modifications, so on and so forth. But I've also ran into several issues where that athlete that sees the trainer, right, might not get to you before their training session, or that trainer might not get to you about that athlete before the training session. And so forming communication lines, both in person, in pop-ins, and meetings with the athletic trainers to go over, who's injured, who's not, who needs modification, who's not, who doesn't, right, is important. And I've also found that when you have larger athletic training staff sizes, like you might have at the division level, for example, when I was at the University of Mexico, they had 13 full-time athletic trainers, right? It's absolutely wild. 16 varsity sports, 13. It's almost one full-time athletic trainer for every sport, right? The strength coach is more likely to be involved with the return to play process for an individual athlete, right? When they have an athletic trainer that is solely dedicated to that sport, right? Because now both the strength coach and the athletic trainer don't have to worry about as many athletes as a whole holistically, right? When the athletic trainer on a staff, like when I was at Allegheny, or even now has to deal with 2, 3, 4 varsity sports, 100 athletes, and so does the strength coach. There's a lot less time in the day for them to be able to dedicate sole responsibility or sole time for them to be able to do a return to play session with an athlete. Like if I'm in the weight room from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. working with teams every hour on the hour, except for from 9 to 11 and 1 to 3 p.m. or so on and so forth. Next one. Okay, now let's talk about the fun stuff, the athletes, right? Obviously, Division I athletes, genetic ceiling much higher, right? We just talked about it with the high school talk. A lot of what you do with the athletes is probably going to work anyway because they're Division I athletes, right? You can give them a lot of different things and they're still going to get better regardless of it's high quality or not. But I have noticed that within each team, within each sport, from sport to sport and from division to division, there tends to be a difference in like hyper responders and low responders, people that respond really, really well, really fast to the training. Right? When I got to Ashland, for example, I went down to visit my brother who works at Division II Shepherd University last October for one of their football games. And after working at the Division III level, being separated from Division I football for 4 years, I walked on that field and I thought, oh my gosh, those guys are jacked, right? Man, they're just bigger. Right? They might not be physically as strong, or it might be smaller differences in the speed metrics, the power metrics, but man, those dudes just bigger, right? The basketball guys at Ashland are 6'7" and above at the tallest, right? My tallest basketball guy at Allegheny before I left was 6'3". Right? That's the guy playing the 5 position at Division III level is 6'3". So there's differences in just the genetic makeup of the athletes, how fast or how well they respond to the training and how quickly. But I've also noticed that there's a difference in the athletes that want extra work or not, right? So for example, a lot of the times when I moved from the Division I level to Division III level, there was a lot of athletes that were used to doing a lot of work on their own, right? A lot of extra work. Plus at the Division III level, when their athletic ceiling might not be as high, they might be more interested in something like fitness, right? And so now they're seeing stuff on social media with fitness and the industry being larger than it ever has. They want to go over to the rec gym and do things on their own totally, right? Every single day, twice a day if they want, right? They want to put their headphones on. They want to wear the stringers. They want to go get a bro session with whatever they saw on social media that day, regardless of whether it impacts their session that we did with us the day before or the day after. And there's nothing wrong with athletes wanting extra work, but to be targeted the way that you do it, right? And it to be targeted the way that you talk to the athletes about getting an extra work, right? And you want to be able to, have it be as beneficial to them as possible. And it's a little bit easier for you to get extra work sessions in with the strength coach, right? When there's larger blocks of time that you can have athletes in for them to be able to do that on the run. So for example, when I was at Allegheny, right, outside of the times that we were doing team training sessions, because the training can't be mandatory in the off season, right, we hosted open hours. And an open hour was essentially a time where the athletes who had academic conflicts or something that would impact their ability to come to the team training session, they could come in and train. That was also a time that we communicated with the athletes, hey, if you want extra work, this is the time that you come in, right? Instead of going off and doing, whatever you want over in our community center weight room and taking it away from the 50 to 100 community members that are using it at the same time, right? Come in and get extra work in the open hours, right? Training age tends to be lower at the lower levels, right? As mostly, again, not because high school strength conditioning is a growing field, but because their genetic ceilings are lower, right? They've had less experience, and because the athletic ceiling is lower, they tend to be people who in high school, right, stayed away from being in the gym. It might have been an area of confidence for them, right? An area where they lacked confidence, right? An area where they lacked self-esteem to go off and do the training on their own, right? And so I saw, especially in the Olympic sports side of Division III level, a lot of athletes with no weight room experience at all, right? And so they come in, their training age is really low. And again, there's a fractal model of within the team, with team to team, from division to division, right? those things are going to be different, obviously. But you might have on a Division III swim team, 5'3", 105-pound young woman who comes in with no experience at all, who's wide-eyed, like terrified of everything, and doesn't want to talk to anyone the whole time. And on that same team, you might have the 6'3", 200-pound swim guy, right, who's been training for 4 years in high school and wants to absolutely throw out the gym, right? And so you have to train in the same session, right? You have to talk to them differently. You have to approach the training for them, not necessarily differently in terms of their progressions and regressions. Maybe you have a couple of things that are different for the lower training age athlete. Maybe you don't. But you have to approach the way that you talk to them a little bit different, the way that you think about your interactions with them a little bit different. The same thing goes for their investment or commitment, right? Especially coming from the Division III level to the Division II level, I noticed that at a high academic Division III institutions, the athletes are not there for the sport, right? They are there to get a high level education, right? Go on to be doctors, right? And engineers and politicians, and they're there for the schooling, right? And they know that, right? And we have to know that as well, right? Because when I come in and there's no money on the line, right? They care about winning for sure, but they just stayed up until 2 o'clock in the morning studying for this test because they can't afford to not have a 4.0, right? Because they will absolutely destroy themselves and not know if they'll be able to live if they don't have a 4.0 in school, right? And they don't have to be at the session if they don't want to. They show up, and all of a sudden, I'm screaming at their face because they're, a minute later because their exercise technique is slightly worse than before, and they just won't show up anymore, right? And so you tailor the way that you communicate with these athletes based off of what you know about them in the past, right? The same thing goes for extracurriculars. I did find when I was at Division III level, there was a lot of extracurriculars like clubs or sororities and fraternities that tended to get in the way of our training because the training was not mandatory. And so you had to find a way to make the training session and the training space a place that's worth being more than what they want to do on their own, the things they signed up for while they're in college, right? Now they did sign up for the sport, obviously. They want to be really good. At the end of the day, the culture comes from the top down, what you do as a coach, and you make it a space that's inviting, a place they want to be in, that's enthusiastic, right? So on and so forth. But at the end of the day, those are some of the things that did change a little bit. And at the very, very bottom, one of the biggest things that I'm running into right now is with the summer training, right? We're working at the Division I level. Men's basketball, women's basketball, football have time periods during the summer where they have to be on campus for 8 weeks total, right? Division II level, we're about to have maybe 70 to 90 football guys on campus starting a little bit after Father's Day, all the way through training camp. Even though that training is not mandatory, that's just built into the way that the school operates, and the athletes want to be there over the summer to train. At the Division III level, I maybe saw 20 athletes every summer total across all of the sports, right? Because those athletes at the Division III level are going off and they're doing internships, or they're working for the city, or they're doing something, whatever, off campus, away from the school over the summer. But that impacts the way that you train athletes during this academic year, because especially for the fall sports, that arguably the most important training time of the year, which is preseason for them, to come in the fall. August 10th is the report date. Football at Ashland is probably going to be around the same for most football schools around the country. I haven't seen them at all for 3 months, right? And so it's really difficult to potentially give them the most adequate training program that accounts for contact prep and all the speed work that they want and all the strength work that we should give them in preparation for the season in the fall, if I don't see them at all for 3 months, right? And so the training looks a little bit different when you look at it. So I was at the CSCCA conference in Indianapolis, right? And there was a presentation that was very similar to this one on a larger scale. There was a couple of strength coaches, one from Davidson's College in North Carolina's FCS school, one from South Alabama, which is a group of 5 FBS school, and then one from the University of Utah, which is a Power 5 FBS school. And they were talking about perspectives from those levels to levels, right? All the Division I level, but FCS, group of 5, Power 5. One of the biggest concepts that got brought up now is the concept of the transfer portal, right? The coaches from University of Utah and South Alabama both said that they had 35 plus new athletes in January, right? They'll have maybe 10 to 20 more at the start of summer in June, right? And all of those athletes may be gone in December, right? And so one of the biggest pieces that came up from that conversation was this idea of, is the long-term athletic development model at the college level, is that dead, right? Is that no longer something that you think about at all? Because you might not have an athlete for 4 years anymore. You might have them for 6 months, right? And how do you program for that athlete when you know you might only have them for 6 months? They come in as a freshman, and do you slow cook their athletic development? Do you start them with regress versions of exercises? Do you start them with something that is more maybe appropriate for their training age? Or do you just throw them in whatever the older guys are doing? Because you don't have the staffing, you don't have the spacing, you don't have the size of the facilities, and you have no idea if the athletes are going to be here long enough to even see any of those progressions through to the end, right? What I found, at least working at these levels, is that more coaches often than not just throw the athletes in, right? Whether or not that's appropriate or not is up to your specific circumstance, up to the level that you're at, your athletes that are in front of you, the training age of them, what you feel is important based off of what you see and what you have logistically in front of you. The same thing goes for using the Olympic lifts or not. When I was in Division III level, I used the Olympic lifts a lot with the teams because I value the coordinative aspects of the Olympic lifts for those lower tiered athletes or lower genetic ceiling athletes, right? Not because I thought that they were going to be great power developers for us, because we were probably going to get more of our power development, speed development out of true sprinting, jumping, jump training, plyometrics, so on and so forth. But the athletes that had a lower training age valued using the Olympic lifts because it allowed them to coordinate their bodies, right? Learn where they were in space a little bit more for the athletes that may or may not have been able to do that in the past or had the ability to do that in the past. I also found that with the lower training age athletes, you might be able to use a little bit more traditional hypertrophy work methods because they'll value adding extra muscle mass first versus chasing speed, power, and size. The added muscle mass that they gain from doing maybe higher sets or higher rep sets, higher set and rep schemes that are more volume based, more traditional hypertrophy work. They might get more out of that, one, because they can still get stronger from it, because you can still get stronger from anywhere reps between 3 and 30. And two, they can use the extra volume as long as you can support it nutritionally for extra body armor, right? Or so on and so forth. The same thing goes for with the transfer portal, whether you are going to use a foundation program and transition them from a foundation program that might look something like a ground zero program from Joe Cannon, or a foundation program from Zach Bacon, or something where they're doing tempo models at the beginning for regress versions of exercises like goblet squats or front squats, and then you move them on into these models. Whether you do that or not, again, it's up to your athletes that are in front of you, up to you as a coach to determine what is best. But I've mostly seen that Division III level, you can value doing the Olympic lifts, hypertrophy work, very base level strength and conditioning, because the athletes can benefit from having added muscle mass, having extra coordinative work from the Olympic lifts, and spending more time in those base strength progressions for longer without progressing them on to what we consider fancy stuff, or college triphasic, where you're doing French contrast methods, right? You might not value doing that with an athlete because you'll rob them of that stimulus twice. They might not be ready for it on the front end, right? Because they don't have that traditional background enough of just strength and muscle mass and power and doing the exercise with a great quality technique. And so they're not ready for it on the front end. And then you also already expose it to them so early where they can't get anything out of it. They might not get as much out of it as they could have. Then when they are traditionally ready for it, they've already been exposed to it, so they won't get enough out of it on the back end either. I want to touch a little bit on a couple of the coaching points that you might use, or some of the things you might think about when you approach coaching these different athletes. One of them is a self-determination theory. And it goes back to the athlete's motivation to do a certain task is tied to 3 things, right? Their competence of the task, or their ability to feel like they're competent in the task, they're good at it, right? Their autonomy, or whether they feel like they have some sort of choice and they have control over their actions and decisions. And then their relatedness, which means they're in a group where they feel like they are similar to the people around them. The way that you approach each athlete at each of these levels is different because their motivations are different. And the athletes at the Division I level, right, might feel more competent in their sport than they do in the weight room, right? Athletes at lower levels might feel more competent in the weight room than they do in the sport, right? You'll find athletes within each team that will go back and forth between those 2 models as well. Same thing with the autonomy. I listened to a talk recently from the strength coach of women's basketball at South Carolina, and she was talking about how much autonomy she gives to her student athletes in women's basketball, to where like you might walk in the weight room and the women's basketball team is training, and there's 15 athletes, and there's 15 totally different things going on all at one time, right? Like 15 totally different squatting variations, 15 totally different pressing variations, totally different hinging variations, depending on the day. Right? They might have some things that are similar, but she gives a lot of autonomy to those student athletes. And I was talking with one of my coaching friends about how, in our experience with lower tier athletes or athletes at the Division III level, we can't afford to give them that level of autonomy because we have no idea if they have enough of a breadth of experience to know what to choose. We might only have exposed them to 2 or 3 different exercises, and so they only have 2 or 3 different exercises to choose from. And how do they know which one's going to be beneficial or not? Do we understand that they're going to make the choice that will best provide the stimulus to them, or are they just going to choose the one that's easier, right? And again, it's up to you as a coach to be able to provide that to them and be able to educate them on that. And that comes down to relationship building relationship with the athletes, understanding why they play the sport, understanding what's the reasoning behind them playing the sport or training at all. I tend to appeal more to like long-term benefits individually for the Division III athlete, because none of them are gone professional at all, right? And if they understand that this is something that they can do for the rest of their lives and it's going to improve their longevity, they can enjoy it, they'll be more physically active for the rest of their lives, and it's something that they might do recreationally for the rest of their lives, they might get something better out of their weight room experience in college level than me, trying to appeal to them boosting their sprint number because it's going to make them a better athlete because we're going to try to win Division III national championship, right? Like they might get something better out of it if I appeal to their ability to be healthier, right, more resilient, more robust for the rest of their lives than if I only appeal to sports success. Where that might be flip-flopped at the Division I level where there's money on the line for these athletes and we really want to win a national championship. And you're here with getting paid to win a national championship, right? And so this is the reason we want to do this. We want you to be a better athlete so that you can feel better about yourself. Yeah, for sure. But at the end of the day, there might be more at stake for those. Situational leadership theory developed in like the 1970s-ish for managers to manage their business employees. Essentially came down to this. There was like an x-axis and a y-axis, a model from high motivation to low motivation, and from high skill to low skill, right? And within those, right, it almost becomes a quadrant system of low motivation with low skill, low motivation with high skill, high motivation with low skill, high motivation with high skill, right? And you can see those types of athletes in your weight rooms, and you might see a higher distribution of athletes with each of those quadrants in each of your teams and within each of the levels. So when you have a team that is low motivation and low skill, you must be much more direct with them, right? And that might be like, for example, my Division III swim and dive team, right? Not very motivated to be in the weight room and really not skilled in the weight room, right? So you have to be a lot more direct in the way that you approach the teaching of the exercises and the cueing of the exercises for them, because you can't leave them alone to their own devices because they don't have very much experience, and it's going to be much more difficult for you to be able to, delegate tasks to leaders, right? To be able to do that in the room and coach their peers if they don't know what to coach, or they don't know what they're coaching. Right? Whereas if you have athletes in there who might be super highly motivated and super highly skilled in the weight room, you can delegate tasks to them and allow them to coach each other and allow them to coach within their rack or within their group of athletes. It's the same thing that Dan just talked about. We do the same thing at the college level. Every single session, I talk to those athletes, hey, right, do everything right yourself first, right? Then coach your teammates that are at your racks. Hopefully they can do everything right, right? Then coach the racks that are around you, and then hopefully coach the rest of the team and do the rest of that stuff, right? But within each team and within each group of athletes from division to division as well, you might see a higher or lower percentage of athletes in each of those quadrants. Same thing goes with learning styles and cueing, but like you might see a higher percentage of athletes who are more visual or auditory learners at a lower level because they are more type A personalities, right? They might be more willing, especially at a high academic school like Allegheny College, like they might get a lot of their learning from sitting down, watching a video, or listening to a talk, right? And so you might do a little bit extra talking to them or a little bit extra demonstrating to them, but with for example, right, a Division II football athlete, right? I might demo an exercise one time and they might do it better than me, right? Because they might be a better athlete than me, and then I have to do much less cueing, much less coaching for them to be able to exercise at a high level. They might with a lesser tier athlete. So you keep those things in mind as you move from levels to levels and within each team, that there's going to be differences in their motivation, differences in their skills, differences in how they learn the exercises, and those things might change the way that you train the athletes, might change how you progress exercises, or how you build relationships with athletes as well. Some of the mistakes that I think that I made when I first got to the University of New Mexico was thinking that because these guys were Division I athletes, the training needed to be super fancy, right? I needed to do highly advanced versions of exercises, things that they probably didn't get very much out of at the time, just because they were Division I athletes. Right? I was a graduate assistant, looking to try to make my mark on the profession, and so we're doing things that we probably didn't need to do. Right? We're probably doing too many triphasic variations, or too many snatch variations. We were doing landmine snatches and like hip lock dumbbell snatches for track and field. Right? Like these guys probably don't need that if they're freshmen coming out of high school with not a lot of experience. But I needed to see that, right? Because I was a GA and I wanted to make it look like we were doing something specific for that sport, right? And so when I was at Allegheny and now here at Ashland, the programming has very much been dialed down to very base level, right? Like we're going to be able to squat, hinge, push, pull really well. Every team is going to be doing something almost very similar. You might have some sport-specific differences in the way that you address like the volume of certain exercises or the volume of certain like training for each region of the body, each area of the body. Like I might do some more arm work or some more lower limb work or some more hip work for certain teams versus others. But at the base level, the goal is just to train well, basic exercises really well. Just like Will talked about earlier, the training that he talked about on the screen for the high school athlete is the same training that college athletes should be doing at every level too. Right? It doesn't change that much. The strength training is just the strength training. It's just extra fitness work. We're trying to get stronger. We're trying to sprint a little bit faster. We're trying to jump a little bit higher. It doesn't need to be fancier because we're a Division I athlete versus a Division II athlete, or you're a Division II athlete versus a Division III athlete. Right? The athletes need to be able to do these certain things really, really well, regardless of where they train at. And so that goes for how do we prepare high school athletes for the college level? Be able to squat, hinge, push, pull, lunge, carry, sprint, jump, throw. Do it on 2 legs. Do it on 1 leg. Do it really, really well. I listened to Mike Israel talk. He's the creator, owner of Renaissance Periodization, all over social media now, actually with some funky stuff that he has on videos and some controversial takes that he may or may not have on podcasts. But he said something that struck me as something that's important to discuss with preparing high school athletes, and that if you're going to train these movements, train them through 4 ranges of motion, and make sure they feel athletic and feel snappy, right? The athletes can feel athletic when they do something training through a 4 range of motion, and it feels snappy to them. They're probably doing it really, really well. Just make sure that they perform basic exercises with high proficiency and understand that when they go to the college level, if they go to the Division I level, Division II level, Division III level, there might be differences in the amount of staffing that they have, the weight room size, right? The ability to have access to a strength coach, right? That stuff might be different depending on where they're looking at the schools, and they should be prepared to transition from the high school level to the college level just by being able to do those things really, really well. On the same lines, outside of just the training, they need to be prepared to be consistent with the training, right? They should be able to have the idea that training consistently with your team is important. They should understand urgency and flow in the weight room, how to transition from exercise to exercise, how to coach their teammates up. Like, again, the same things that Coach Jan just talked about, coaching each other, coaching your rack, putting things away correctly, having pride for the weight room, having pride for the training that they're doing. Those things are important for them to know, but they may or may not have the technology that you have at the high school level. Maybe they have more, maybe they have less. If you're a high school that has some sports tech or has some sports science, you might not have that at the college level. Are they prepared to be able to train without that or with it, right? Do we have individualization of training? Are we in a situation like that South Carolina where you're going to a Division I school where there's one strength coach for 15 athletes and 15 different people doing 15 different things, right? Or are they going to a school where the strength coach might have 20 varsity sports, and in the same weight room, the women's basketball team is training with the men's basketball team and the golf team all at the same time, right? So the strength coach doesn't have individualized programs for them. There's no autonomy given to the athletes because you're in a small space with a lot of athletes, and so everybody's doing something very similar, and you have to be prepared to be able to train well. And the same thing goes for like the assistance of nutrition or having a sports psychologist on staff. So again, it comes down to the haves versus the have-nots, right? The schools that have the money to be able to allocate to all these resources right? You probably know who they are, right? You can understand when you look at these different schools, who's going to have more and who's going to have less. But are the athletes prepared to be able to do some very basic things very well and be able to understand that when they transition from high school to college, it might be more and it might be less than what they've experienced in the past, but can they transition adequately and appropriately? Okay, that's the end of my talk. Again, I by no means feel like an authority to talk about the differences between Division I, Division II, and Division III strength and conditioning because I've only been at 3 different schools, and just because I've been at 3 different schools in these different divisions, I hope I don't come off as a pseudo expert. Right? I don't pretend to know it all. Neither do I think that I know it all, and neither do I think that all the information that I've presented today is probably very practical for you guys to be able to take home. I didn't present any programming strategies. Didn't say that there are certain exercises you should do from one division to the next. I hope to just provide some insights into my experience at these levels, how they impacted the training of the athletes, progressions, regressions, exercise selection, and so on, coaching of the athletes, how we're able to communicate and build relationships with them based off of their personality, based off of the reasons why they came to school, and some of the logistical challenges that come along with each of the levels and how it impacts the training and the coaching of those athletes. That's my personal cell phone number, my email, and then most of my social media tags as well. Thank you.